Yeah, the question about downsets actually brings us to a question that someone asked on the Sound Techniques website regarding when records today or recordings are made or designed for people listening to on MP3s, and how would you say there are similarities to the way you compressed records in the 60s to the way people compress records for iPods and MP3s today?
Like most questions, the answer is yes and no. I think it was when people started recording in their home studios, they thought that compression was the magic answer to making something sound louder and closer. If you don't know what you're doing with a compressor, it doesn't. All it does is make it thin and tiny. Using compressors and limiters, although limiters really aren't used that much now, but they should be. Because a limiter will just cut the peaks down a bit, whereas a compressor squashes everything. Compressors and limiters are a bit like adding salt to your food. If you add too much, you ruin it. Probably all food needs a bit of salt. I think all recordings probably need a bit of compression, a bit of limiting, but you overdo it at your own peril. So that's one thing. The other half of the answer relates to you've got a big important session in an expensive studio, you've got expensive musicians, you've got an upmarket producer, and yet it's going to be heard through earphones on an iPod.
Yeah.
What's important is what the material is originated on. The classic example is when VHS domestic cameras came out. People buy them, I had one, and you used to get really good quality recordings. And then you make a copy to send to Auntie, and the copy's absolute crap. But then you go and buy, or in those days you bought a VHS cassette of a feature film, and the quality's stunning. Now the reason for that is that, you know, feature films originated on, well, they were then 35mm, sometimes 70mm.
Yeah.
And even though it's going to be played on a VHS cassette, or in our case it's going to be played on an iPod, the higher quality you start with, the less degradation you get by the time it gets to the iPod. So if it's brilliant to start with, it'll be pretty good when it gets to the iPod. If it's been carelessly recorded, and although it might sound good when you play the original recording back in the studio, you know, because studio controllers are designed to impress. It'll sound fantastic there. But by the time it comes down to iPod level, it'll sound crap. The other thing that affects this is space. If you take a sort of traditional location recording, like the stuff that Schroeder and I did at Levy's, This Is Mersey Beat albums, where the band would be set up in the middle of a ballroom. No acoustics. If you listen to those records now, you can hear, you know, the lead singer's there, the guitars are there, and they're sort of layers, and it's got depth.
Yeah.
Even though they were recorded in mono, there is depth. Now, the more depth you have in your original record, the more depth you're going to maintain when it gets down to iPod level.
Like many of the Sound Techniques records, like the Fairport records and Nick Drake and Judy Collins has that depth as well.
Yes, yes.
That space. And
yes.
depth.
And so the quality is maintained. If everything is squashed up when you originate, it might sound good in its original state, But as I keep on saying, by the time you go down the scale to an iPad, iPod, iPhone, whatever, the quality will drop. There'll be no depth. It'll sound thin. But this doesn't always work. I remember buying the first Sony Discman, a little portable thing we put your CD in. And I used to listen with headphones a lot to Mozart piano concertos. And as we all know, those recordings were recorded analog, 15-inch IPS tape, and digitized 16 bits. But the CDs had fantastic depth to them. There's only one problem with this Discman, and that was very susceptible to being knocked. So you couldn't really even go for a walk without it skipping tracks. So then Sony released another machine which was impervious to shocks. So I immediately went and bought one of those. Put my favourite piano concerto, number 21, on, listened to it, and I couldn't believe how dreadful it was. All that depth had gone,
Yeah.
and it was flat. So what I said about in the original recordings having depth doesn't guarantee that by the time you get it down to CD or iPod that it will maintain that depth. Just the way in which it's encoded.